Ever wonder what women were doing while men were off crusading and jousting? Did medieval ladies really spend all their time embroidering and looking pretty? What if I told you that behind castle walls and beneath convent floors, women were forming their own secret societies and wielding power in ways history books rarely mention? Number 8. The Beguines. Holy women or dangerous rebels? Were they nuns? Were they feminists? The answer is complicated. The Beguines emerged in the 13th century as one of history's most fascinating female communities. Unlike nuns, these women took no permanent vows and answered to no male authority. They lived together in communities called beguinages, supported themselves through work, and devoted their lives to prayer and charity. But here's where things get juicy. The church was totally suspicious of them. Women living independently, without male oversight. Women interpreting religious texts themselves, the horror. In many European cities, these communities of single women established their own mini-villages, with walls, gates, churches, and hospitals. The Beguinage in Bruges still stands today as testament to their organization. These women weren't just praying all day. They were running businesses, teaching children, caring for the sick, and writing mystical texts that pushed the boundaries of acceptable religious thought. Mechthilde of Magdeburg and Marguerite Porete wrote spiritual works so radical that Marguerite was eventually burned at the stake in 1310. Yes, burned at the stake, her crime. Writing The Mirror of Simple Souls, a mystical work suggesting that a soul united with God no longer needed the Church's intermediaries. The Beguines walked a dangerous line between acceptable piety and dangerous independence. Their communities spread across Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and France, sometimes numbering thousands of women. They survived periodic persecution, with some communities continuing well into the 20th century. Were they a secret society? Not exactly, but they created spaces where women could live beyond the typical medieval options of marriage or conventional religious orders, and that was revolutionary enough. Number 7. The Catharines, secret healers of Catalonia. Have you ever heard of the Catharines? Probably not. This shadowy group of women healers operated throughout medieval Catalonia, passing down forbidden medical knowledge from mother to daughter. While male physicians dominated official medicine, the Catharines preserved ancient healing traditions focused on herbalism, midwifery, and what we might now call holistic health. These women weren't just mixing up the occasional headache remedy. They were performing surgery, setting bones, delivering babies, and treating everything from leprosy to love sickness. They gathered herbs by moonlight, partly for magical reasons, partly because they were busy with other work during daylight, chanting specific incantations believed to enhance the plant's healing properties. The group allegedly took its name from Catherine of Alexandria, a martyred saint known for her vast knowledge and healing abilities. Members identified each other through subtle signals, a specific arrangement of pins in their headwear or patterns embroidered into their clothing. Though largely unrecorded in official histories, their existence appears in court records when members faced accusations of witchcraft or practicing medicine without permission. One fascinating case from 1397 describes a woman named Francesca, who was brought before Barcelona authorities for performing forbidden surgeries. In her defense, she claimed membership in the Sisters of Catherine, who had practiced healing arts since before the time of kings. The court surprisingly released her after several noble women testified to being successfully treated by her. Were the Catharines actually organized enough to be considered a secret society? Historical evidence is frustratingly sparse. But what's clear is that networks of female healers existed, sharing knowledge that challenged male-dominated medical establishments. Their practices blended practical medicine with ritual elements that later became dangerous as the line between healing woman and witch grew increasingly thin in the late medieval period. Number 6. The cult of Diana. Moonlit gatherings, or inquisitors, fantasy. Did groups of women really gather under the full moon to worship Diana, the ancient goddess of the hunt? Inquisition records across medieval Europe contain thousands of confessions describing women flying through the night to join wild celebrations led by a goddess figure. Were these actual pagan survivals, or just fantasies extracted through torture? The truth lies somewhere in between. While many confessions were certainly forced, evidence suggests some women did participate in rituals that preserved elements of pre-Christian practice. In northern Italy, court records from the 13th to 15th centuries repeatedly mention women who called themselves benandanti, good walkers, or followers of the game of Diana. These women described gathering at crossroads or in fields, sometimes in dreams or trances, where they would feast, dance, and learn magical knowledge under the guidance of a goddess-like figure. Some claimed to travel spiritually while their bodies remained at home, an important distinction they emphasized to avoid accusations of physically attending witches' sabbaths. In the Alpine regions, similar groups called themselves the Good Society, or the Company of Signora Orienti. Members insisted their gatherings brought fertility to the fields and protected communities from harm. One woman testified that she went with the Diana, who is the queen of the fairies, and many other women rode with her on various beasts, and they entered the houses of the rich and ate and drank there. Historians now generally believe these confessions contain kernels of actual folk traditions mixed with elements suggested by interrogators. Some communities likely maintained rituals honoring female deities, disguised within a framework of Christian saints or fairy legends. These weren't necessarily organized secret societies, but rather loose networks, preserving ancient knowledge through increasingly dangerous times. What's particularly interesting is how class affected these practices. Peasant women, accused of following Diana, faced torture and execution, while noble women engaging in similar veneration of female saints or Virgin Mary cults received church approval. One woman's dangerous paganism was another's acceptable devotion, depending entirely on her social status and political connections. Number 5. The Order of the Hatchet. Medieval women, warriors. A secret military order composed entirely of women. In medieval Spain, it happened. The Order of the Hatchet, Orden de la Hacha, stands as one of history's most remarkable female fighting forces. The story goes that in 1149, while the men of Tortosa were away battling the Moors, Muslim forces attacked the poorly defended town. Instead of surrendering, the women of Tortosa grabbed whatever weapons they could find, including household hatchets, donned armor, and mounted a fierce defense of their city walls. Their unexpected resistance was so effective that the attacking forces retreated in confusion. When Count Ramon Berenguer IV returned to find his city saved by female defenders, he was so impressed that he created a military order exclusively for women. Members of this order received special privileges, nearly unheard of for medieval women. They were exempted from certain taxes, given precedence at public events, and allowed to wear distinctive emblems showing a red hatchet. Most significantly, they gained decision-making authority typically reserved for men. Unlike most medieval military orders, the Order of the Hatchet wasn't primarily religious. It was established to honor courage and civic duty, values usually celebrated only in men. The order never spread beyond Tortosa and eventually faded from prominence. But its establishment challenges our assumptions about rigid gender roles in medieval society. Was this truly a secret society? Not in the conspiratorial sense, but the order operated with unusual autonomy for women of the period. Their meetings, training practices, and internal organization remain largely undocumented, as few male chroniclers took interest in recording women's activities unless they directly impacted men's affairs. What makes the Order of the Hatchet particularly fascinating is how it reveals the flexibility of supposedly fixed gender boundaries during crisis. Throughout medieval Europe, similar examples appear during sieges, when women took up arms only to be expected to return to traditional roles once danger passed. The women of Tortosa managed to institutionalize their moment of power into something more lasting. Number 4. The Cathar women. Perfectae, of the good Christians. Would you die for your religious beliefs? Thousands of Cathar women did. The Cathars, from the Greek word for pure, flourished in southern France during the 12th and 13th centuries. Their belief system challenged virtually everything about Catholic doctrine. They rejected the material world as evil, opposed procreation, denied Christ's physical incarnation, and permitted women to serve as religious leaders called perfectae. Yes, women preaching, officiating ceremonies, and holding religious authority equal to men in medieval Europe. The Cathar perfectae lived lives of strict asceticism, rejecting marriage meat and material possessions. After completing rigorous training, they earned the right to administer the consolamentum, the only Cathar sacrament which purified believers from the corruption of matter. While male perfecti typically traveled to preach, female perfecti often established houses where they lived communally, supporting themselves through textile work while teaching and ministering to believers. These houses became centers of alternative religious education where women could attain levels of literacy, theological knowledge, and authority impossible within mainstream Catholicism. The Catholic Church responded with the Albigensian Crusade, 1209 to 1229, a brutal military campaign followed by the horrors of the Inquisition. At Montsegur in 1244, over 200 perfecti and perfectae chose to walk into flames rather than renounce their faith. Among them were dozens of women who had served as religious leaders. Did Cathar perfectae operate as a secret society? As persecution intensified, certainly. They developed elaborate codes, secret meeting places, and underground networks to continue their ministry. Inquisition records describe female Cathar leaders hiding in forests, caves, and sympathetic households, moving under cover of night to offer guidance to believers. What's particularly fascinating is how Cathar women navigated dual identities, sometimes appearing as conventional noblewomen or merchants' wives, while secretly serving as religious authorities. Some high-ranking perfecti came from the most prestigious families in the Languedoc region, using their social connections to protect fellow believers and spread their teachings across class boundaries. Number 3. The Beguines Noirs. The Shadow Sisters. Have you heard whispers of the Black Beguines? While the regular Beguines operated openly, historical records hint at a more secretive splinter group operating in the shadows of medieval French and Flemish cities. These Beguines Noirs allegedly dealt in forbidden knowledge, political intrigue, and even espionage. Unlike their conventional sisters, the Black Beguines maintained no permanent residences, instead moving between safe houses and operating through a complex network of merchants, servants, and noble patrons. Their name derived not from wearing black, though some reportedly did, but from working with knowledge considered dark by authorities, everything from advanced mathematics and astronomy to political secrets and banned medical techniques. Court records from 14th century Ghent mention a woman identified only as Margaretha, one of the blackened sisters, arrested for possessing instruments of calculation and celestial observation unsuitable for women, and correspondence harmful to the Duke's interests. Before her case concluded, Powerful unknown allies apparently secured her release and disappearance. Similar references appear across Northern Europe, a network of educated women operating outside official channels, gathering and trading information. Some historians suggest they functioned as an early intelligence network, using the mobility and invisibility of women, who were often literally not seen by men in power, to observe and report on political and religious development. The most intriguing aspect of the Black Beguines was their apparent connection to seats of power. Several royal accountants' records from the period show payments to unnamed wise women for services to the crown, not to be recorded. Were medieval kings and queens employing female spies and advisors outside official channels? Evidence for the Black Beguines remains fragmentary and contested. Many historians consider them more legend than reality, possibly a misinterpretation of records referring to actual Beguines who simply wore black garments. Others point to the consistent pattern of references across multiple countries and decades as evidence that some network of covertly operating educated women existed. Whether organized society or loose association, the hints of their existence challenge our understanding of medieval women's roles. In the gaps between official histories, women may have created spaces to exercise forms of power and knowledge from which they were officially excluded. Number 2. The Daughters of Lilith. Sexual mysticism or medieval myth? Did medieval women form secret groups dedicated to sexual liberation and mysticism? According to alarmed church authorities, they absolutely did. Inquisition records from across Europe contain references to women who called themselves Daughters of Lilith, supposedly practicing rituals that combine sexuality with spiritual enlightenment. Lilith, according to Jewish mystical tradition, was Adam's first wife, who refused to be subservient and fled Eden. Throughout the medieval period, she evolved in folklore as a symbol of female rebellion against patriarchal control. For women seeking alternatives to Christian sexual repression, Lilith represented an appealing counter-narrative. In 1387, an inquisitor in Toulouse documented confessions from women who allegedly gathered during new moons to honor the first woman who denied man dominion. Participants supposedly engaged in rituals involving special unguents, chanting and sexual activities designed to achieve spiritual ecstasy. Similar accounts appear in German, Italian, and Spanish records. But here's the million-dollar question. Were these groups real or inventions of male anxiety? Many historians believe these confessions primarily reflect male fears about female sexuality rather than actual organized groups. The details often match too perfectly with pre-existing stereotypes about deviant women to be entirely credible. However, some scholars argue that while inquisitors may have exaggerated and distorted women's activities, the persistence of similar accounts across Europe suggests something was happening. Women seeking spiritual and sexual autonomy might indeed have gathered in secret, creating rituals that honored feminine divine figures outside Christian orthodoxy. What makes this particularly fascinating is how accusations evolved alongside wider social changes. During periods when women gained economic independence through guilds or inheritance rights, accusations about Lilith worshippers mysteriously increased. The pattern suggests that women exercising actual social power triggered heightened concern about potential sexual and spiritual rebellion. Whether or not organized Daughters of Lilith groups existed exactly as described in inquisitorial records, the concept itself reveals the complex relationship between female sexuality, spirituality, and power in the medieval imagination. These accounts, however distorted, provide rare glimpses into both the fears of medieval authorities and the possible aspirations of women seeking alternatives to conventional religious and sexual roles. Number 1. The Women of the Rose. Literary circle or revolutionary cabal was a secret society of aristocratic women behind the first literary quarrel in European history. The so-called Quarrel of the Rose erupted in early 15th century France, when Christine de Pizan, Europe's first professional female writer, challenged the misogynistic content of the wildly popular Roman de la Rose poem. But Christine wasn't fighting alone. Historical evidence suggests she represented the public face of a network of powerful court women who strategically used literature and patronage to change attitudes about women's nature and capabilities. These women of the Rose included some of the most influential noble ladies in France: Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, the Duchesses of Burgundy and Orleans, and dozens of court ladies who commanded significant resources. What made this group remarkable wasn't just their defense of women's dignity in literature. They systematically commissioned and circulated texts presenting alternative views of women's intellectual and moral capacity. They patronized female artists and writers. They established salons where new ideas could be debated, and most significantly, they placed women they supported in positions as tutors to royal children, directly influencing the next generation of European rulers. Documentation suggests these women operated through carefully coded correspondence, using literary references as signals to identify allies across European courts. They exchanged manuscripts with marginalia containing messages visible only to those who understood their references. Their influence stretched from Paris to Prague, Milan to London. The most compelling evidence for their organized nature comes from the remarkable consistency with which certain themes appeared in works they commissioned. Not just defense of women, but specific arguments about female education, marriage reform, and women's capacity for leadership. These weren't just random wealthy women with similar tastes. Their patronage shows strategic coordination. Were they truly a secret society, in a conspiratorial sense? Probably not, but they certainly constituted a deliberately organized network operating below the surface of official court structures, using their unique access as noble women to influence culture and politics through channels invisible to most men in power. Christine de Pizan's famous works, The Book of the City of Ladies and The Treasure of the City of Ladies, weren't just the works of a lone feminist voice crying in the wilderness. They represented the public manifestation of ideas developed and promoted by a sophisticated network of educated women working together across European court society. What's perhaps most fascinating about the Women of the Rose is how effectively they used soft power through art, literature, education, and carefully cultivated influence to challenge misogyny without directly confronting male authority. Their approach created space for new ideas about women's nature and capacity that would influence Renaissance thinking. Did these women change the world overnight? No, but their coordinated efforts to reshape cultural attitudes about women through strategic patronage and placement of allies represented one of the most sophisticated female networks of the Middle Ages. Their story reveals how women could exercise remarkable influence even within the confines of a deeply patriarchal society. Do we underestimate how much of history has been shaped by women operating just beyond our historical vision? What other secret networks of female influence might have existed that left even fewer traces in the historical record? When we look at medieval women only through the documents and institutions created by men, how much of their actual experience, organization, and agency remains invisible to us?